A lot of people don't spend the time. One, you have to be the role model to do it yourself. I think that's acknowledging that life is a lifelong learning process and you have to get better every day. And your job is to improve and be a better version of yourself tomorrow than today. Most leaders just don't do that. I think the challenge is the higher you go up, the harder it is, the more emphasis it is on soft skills, what you look at, and power skills, which are much harder to learn. They challenge your soul. They force you to do things that are a lot more uncomfortable than learning like a hard skill.
Welcome to the How to Scale Commercial Real Estate Show. Whether you are an active or passive investor, we'll teach you how to scale your real estate investing business into something big.
Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, and I always love a great intro. And so it's funny because every time when you're at a conference or event, I'm speaking and someone's reading your bio and it's like much longer. I tell people it's almost like if you were listening to your own eulogy. And it's like, it's hard to stay focused on the audience because your eyes are always darting around when people are talking to you. It's like the funniest thing, at least for me.
Right.
I just rather almost introduce myself because it seems odd people talking about you in the third person when you're just standing.
I asked three questions to every guest who comes on this show. I know we got a little bit in your bio here, but can you quickly tell us where you started, where you are now, and how you got there?
So I originally went to law school. I got my master's in communications, and I really wanted to do crisis management, right? So I thought about helping people through sticky situations. And I realized at the time that I was doing it, the law superseded the communications, and that's what got people in trouble. They thought legally instead of humanistically, and how do we actually talk to people like normally to really be transparent and lay everything on the table. And so I thought this would be a great thing for me to do. And then essentially when I was interviewing for jobs, like my second year jobs, and I went through the interview process, people told me to ask an easy question at the end, and I had everything mapped out, except I never asked what that easy question should be. So I picked probably the worst question now that I could have ever picked. And that's, are you happy? And when I was asking that question of super successful people or people that were just starting the law, it was the question that gave them the most trouble in every interview. Where it was the longest for me to ask, right, at the end of the sentence, are you happy? The longest for that to finish and them to start to answer from 30 some interviews. And I only noticed it when I was interviewing, like towards the end, because all the trends in your head sometimes come together and you're like, wow, this is kind of weird. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me until, I was driving home or driving back to school because I was in New York City and I was driving to Syracuse. I was like, if all of these people are having trouble asking that question, what makes me think I can do something none of them can do? And it was like a major aha moment for me to think to myself, like, am I really going to try to be the Michael Jordan of lawyers and do something they're not? I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that are happy and love their job, right? Whatever I was interviewing for. But it got me to start asking deeper questions about what I was doing. Was this really the best for me? Is it really a good fit? Instead of just doing what I sort of thought that I should be doing based on school and what people were telling me and, the story I had written in my head about everything that was supposed to line up. And then it just went. At that point, I was like, well, I love technology, and I started to read about Silicon Valley, and I was like, well, how about we try that? And it was difficult because when you're in law school, everyone tells you you're crazy. And it's difficult because you sort of feel like an outcast, and you actually start to question yourself. And when you have to go against everyone around you, it becomes a really difficult decision. And it sort of haunts you for a long time, because anytime, like when I was out in Silicon Valley and things went wrong, the voices popped back up in my head, right? Because I was like, well, I could have picked this path and now you're here, right? So, but it was great going out to Silicon Valley. I got to work with Steve Jobs at Pixar and at Apple. I got to, work at Netflix with the current CEO and spend time. I got to work with a lot of people, right place, right time, some of it being fortunate, but I also picked out the best agency. Like I knew what I wanted was a marketing agency so I could learn across a lot of things because I love to learn because of school. And so I got to really do a lot of really fun things. And, over time, as I went to some startups and one that went public and did well, and then just working at HP, which is a huge conglomerate, I was like, I really love the people part of it, helping people solve problems. And a traditional role, I'm really stuck.
Mm.
And like I have to deal with all this bureaucracy internally and the politics. And it was really hard for me to find an environment that I could really flourish in. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I was like, all right, well, let me go see if I can start a side hustle where I take some people that I find that are super successful and how can I make them more successful? And so that's really what I did. I just tested the theory and said, would they pay me? And if they paid me, could I get them really sizable results, right? So I picked the chairman of a board of a company here in Dallas that was really big, that was figuring out transition. I had someone else who was the technology, like head of sales in a large company. And I was like, all right, leaving myself like 6 or 8 months. And I won't charge them that much just so that way I can ensure that like one, they'll do it. And two, I don't put that much pressure on myself to try to figure this all out that quickly. But it worked. And then I just decided to do it.
Keep doing it. I love it. What were some of the challenges that you faced in deciding how you're going to work with your first clients? Like, was it developing a curriculum? Was it developing the game plan for how you're going to engage, or what did that look like?
I mean, all those things. Because I think the challenging thing about working with people is you're technically always solving somewhat. I mean, the problems now pretty similar, right? No matter what the industry you're in, no matter what you're doing. I mean, when you really boil it up, there's a lot of commonalities across everything. It's not like I haven't seen it before, but at that point, that wasn't the case. I started to have to really do some deep dives and really figure out where would the challenging part of it being. And part of it was really understanding people's psychology, right? It's the self-awareness piece. And so I tried to find people that were not so structured in a traditional model that they had to do the old school asking why, like when you go to traditional psychologists or therapy, right? Because it takes too long. And then people there had no patience, right? They want it solved. So I had to find people that were masters of behavioral change in a lot of different environments and essentially, paid for coaching, taking classes, figuring out things from people. So I could create some model that I could start testing and honing in that would work at some level to diagnose people's blind spots and historical patterns and things and pick them up fast enough that people, would go along with it and do it. And I could give them evidence it would work and make an impact, right? And so that was one of the first things that I had rationalized in my head that I really needed to figure out, which was definitely really hard, but I had it, and there was trial and error. And I met people and read books and paid for things that didn't work very well. But then there were a lot of things that did. And then, the rest of the things I sort of have built out over time, looking at common problems and other issues that people were just having in the business, their businesses themselves, and what separated out people, and that kind of helped.
You mentioned working with people, and 95% of the business owners I talk to, that is their number one challenge, is working with people. What are some of the maybe top 2 to 4 things that you see in that sphere of working with people that business owners face, and then how do you help them overcome those?
Well, a lot of it has to come down with your own blind spots, right? I mean, one of it is if you don't know what you don't know, it really gets in the way. And a lot of people, these are the things that stop them. And when someone like, what's an example of it? Well, I have an issue just pretty common is not listening, right? So you get feedback, and the person is a poor listener, there's some issues with it. Well, oftentimes that is an historical pattern, like something that's happened sort of early in life that really put that blueprint in your head. And it helped you back then, but it's not serving you anymore. And like an example would be at someone who, was in a large family. And the only way to get mom or dad to hear them was to yell over their brothers and sisters, right? And so they gave me examples of that. Well, that's what they learned.
Right.
And so when you share that with someone, they take that feedback and they look at it differently because I'm like, well, you're just doing what you always did. And it helped you back then, but now it's sabotaging your success. And then they look at it in a way where like, oh, I never thought about it like that. Right. And then they're much more open to the feedback because they don't get emotional about it. Because when confront people negatively, their fight or flight brain comes in, right? Instead of their executive brain. and they push back, they give excuses. But when you sort of present something almost like a computer program, like a 1 or 0 to them, they don't look at it. Smart people, they don't look at it like that. They're like, okay, I totally get it. Like, that's something I didn't even realize that I was doing, and I don't want to be that person. Like, let's figure out what I can do. And then you can give them some things, and if they see a little bit of evidence, which is the key, then they'll do more of it. And then the problem is either eliminated or get significantly better. The people around them see that they care, then their attitude changes, and you change a whole new dynamic between individuals. So I think a lot of this starts with the individual and their own self-awareness and blind spots. And I think that's a huge piece of it, right? I would say the next piece is built, the trust between people is a glue that keeps us all together. And people, they say that, but they don't really understand it. And then even if they say that, usually the response back is, well, you build trust through working together with a long time, of getting to know someone. And then I ask, okay, so how do you do all these things? And then there's silence, right? So one of the things that's really struck me is there has to be a quicker way to build trust. Because, right, so I mean, people in real estate business, whether you're working with a client, a group of people, an investor, people working inside your own organization, your success depends on them and your relationship. And that relationship difference is, how much do I trust you? Right? And vice versa, right? That is going to be the key determining factor of your working relationship with that person, because there's all these things they would do if they trusted you at a high level that they wouldn't do with someone else, and vice versa. So one of the things I postulated was there has to be a better way. And I started to read research, and I read this report by a professor who had people ask each other 36 questions. And it's a pretty famous exercise. And it was mainly getting people to fall in love or build really close relationships. So I started to use a similar thing in groups of people, and I found it to be magic, right? Because if you ask a group of people a question like, tell me, like, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in the last year, right? And if it's in real estate, you could say, what's the most important lesson you've learned in real estate in the last year? Well, if you're sitting in a group of people, that's a fascinating question to ask people. Right. But if you ask people deeper questions, like, tell me one person that you'd like to thank for helping you become the person you are today, you learn a lot about someone and they get to talk about it. If you say to everyone in the group answers, you learn a lot about an individual and you see the similarities and not the differences. And that's how you build trust. You put down your preconceived notions of them, even if you do know them. And if it's one-on-one with someone who's like a prospect or a client, you get to know them deeply, and they don't know you're really doing this, but that's the foundational level of building it, because the only people that would ask them a question like that or would care to hear about it are people in their inner circle. So you start to position yourself there really quickly with someone, even though you don't have the time element with them, they start seeing you like that. So it opens up significant opportunities. So you can either do it in a structured process where you get a group together and ask them a set of questions, or you could do it by asking someone a couple questions and sort of slow pedaling it as you're interacting with it. Like if you were doing it with a client or an investor or something else that you wouldn't really have an opportunity to do that. And there's plenty of, but it has to be a vulnerable question. Because if you don't know, it has to be a deep, vulnerable question, right? And I call the second question I asked you was one of them, right? Or you could say to someone, tell me about, like, what's the biggest setback you had as an investor, and like, how did you overcome it? That's a really vulnerable question. It may not like always appear to someone like that, but they're sharing a part of their soul with you inside of what they're saying. And no one would really ask them that question normally up front or in a first couple of conversations, but that allows someone to get to know you, and more importantly, you to get to know them, and for them to have a voice and share. And that's super important to someone. And like for me, that's the glue that builds all of this stuff. It differentiates like an organization, whether it's 3 people, 5, 10, 20, whatever it is, right? So I would say to you, that's probably the second piece of the people thing. And then I think you got to find people that I think to teach the growth and development of whatever you're doing, right? I think that's a huge piece of it. And giving people responsibility, letting them manage up, giving them some entrepreneurial spirit, right? I think combining all those things and guiding them along the way and spending time to coach them and ask them questions. What are you working on? How can I help you? How can I support you? I think if you do that more in a model with people that are working with and managing, or if you're leading people, you change the whole kind of game of how things work and operate in any organization. And obviously it's different depending on every, company you're in, an industry, and size of group, and complexity and challenge.
That's fascinating. So much there. I would love to dig into. I think the compelling, not compelling, but the one that's really interesting is the asking deeper questions. And I know you've come up even with a board game or a card game,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, that you can buy where you can take the game with you and go play it, in a group, and it can be used in any group setting. I actually looked at it quite a bit earlier as kind of podcast prep for this interview, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. You even got a
Yeah.
free download, I think, of a lot of those questions on
Yeah.
in a PDF, which I think, how can someone, because you gave several great examples there. I'm like, oh man, that's a really good question. Is there a way to really create good questions? Because I think and I'm asking a question to get more questions, but I don't know if there's a better way to say that. Obviously, I need help asking questions. Asking good questions is an art. Is there a way to practice that art? And are there some key components we can put in that would help someone in that journey of asking good questions? Gosh,
I think I'd Google it. Google asking really deep questions and think if they make sense, right? I mean, that partly, I got a lot of the questions and tested them out, right?
Okay.
So I'm always looking at things and exercises that people are doing. I really think like the other thing I'd share with people is that, research and being curious is so important in being successful, because a lot of the answers are sitting right here and people just don't take the next level time, or like drilling down to find them. And now we have the internet, and a lot of the stuff is there to really help us, right? I mean, obviously you can ask other people, but a lot of people won't know. But you can just search and find some things. And I think the point of it is there's no magical question alone. It's asking in acidities and doing it to genuinely want to find and learn about people. And I think when you do that, it's the vulnerability that you allow another person to be. Because like Brene Brown is like one of the most famous authors writing on this. When you allow someone to be vulnerable with you, they get to really open up and be who they are. And then you will be like that with them. And you'll cut through the BS and get real, and it'll be transparent. And they know whenever they deal with you, it'll be in a wholly different way than other people. And that's really the difference. And that's what people want. They want to have a connection and belonging to people that they're working with, but they want to fast track it. They don't want to cut through the BS, because mainly that's why small talk is stupid, because everyone wants small talk to get to deep talk, right? Well, why don't you just jump in the deep end? You don't have to. Because I tried this originally, because I started asking questions in the beginning, like, if you had a superpower, what would it be, and choosing it, right? And then I did a parallel one where I'd had people tell me, what's the most important lesson you've learned in the last year? And it's deep, and it's not that much deeper, but deeper. And I've done this in groups, and I saw the outcomes that I went through other questions that were the same on either side. And every time when I did it the second way, the lesson, the outcomes were always better. And I started to learn that like soft pedaling it, the only person I thought it'd make me feel better was myself and not them. Right. And so, and even if they got uncomfortable and didn't love it, the outcomes were always better and they were happier in the end. So I should focus on the outcome in the end, and not what people are going through in the beginning. Right. To try to make it easier or better, because there isn't a fast track for that. You have to go through it.
I love that, in going deeper out of the gate, as opposed to, and especially, I mean, you're in Texas, which is still, I guess, technically the South, but I would say here in the Mid-South, and especially across, most of my family in Arkansas and Alabama, like it's 15 minutes of small talk, no matter what, before we ever even get to the reason we made a phone call. So it's very interesting, that you say that there's a way to go deeper sooner. So that's fantastic. On the growth and development side of things, what are some of the key struggles you find leaders and organizations having in growing and developing the people that work with them, and how do you help them overcome those?
Well, a lot of people, they don't spend the time. I mean, one, you have to be the role model to do it yourself, right? And I think that's acknowledging that life is a lifelong learning process and you have to get better every day. And your job is to improve and be a better version of yourself tomorrow than today. Most leaders just don't do that. They think that and I think the challenge is the higher you go up, the harder it is, because the more emphasis it is on like soft skills, what you look at, and power skills, which are much harder to learn. And they really challenge your soul and they force you to do things that are a lot more uncomfortable than learning like a hard skill or a professional skill, like a capability that you might have, like figuring out how to do a real estate transaction or how to do like quantitative things. Like, so these things get much more difficult as you go out because they're dealing with individuals, right? And people and caring and opening yourself up. And there's a lot more risk associated with that. And that's where people do a really poor job, as they're figuring it out. Because I look at it as someone has hard skills, right? Like computer coding or working in Excel or some other things. And then you have more of a professional skill that's going to be, what is it that you're doing, right? Like a capability of like selling real estate, buying it, what is all those things? And then you have soft skills, which are like leadership, management, teamwork, empathy, communicate, right? And you have to really learn all three of them and excel and have a plan, right, along their growth potential, what you want to do, and figuring out which ones to focus on. How are you learning these things? And do you need one-on-one help? Is it through a book, podcast? I mean, you have to have a variety of things to learn from, but you have to have a plan because otherwise you won't get anywhere. And so part of it is sitting down with people and assessing, right? What is your growth plan? What are the things you're doing well? What are the things you need to work on? I always tell people, like, what's their superpower? And then you also paint a picture for someone in the next year. Like, if you've got goals, I always like to show people what would killing it look like, right? Because that's the other problem I find. Like, if someone says, "Oh, I want you to sell more, do more," but they don't say what, and they don't show them a picture in their head of like, this is what killing it will look like, even if it's not exact.
Right.
And then meeting with them every month to go over this and talk to them about what are they doing, how are they moving this forward, what can you do to help, and then making sure they're staying on a growth plan. Because then at the end of the year, that they will have grown, or if they haven't, well, then that's a problem, right? But you have a monthly performance review with someone that they always know. And whether you're a small business or meet whatever it is, if you take the time, your business is going to do significantly better than if you don't, because people have harbor resentment. There's a lot of things that go on with people who feel like they've been treated unfairly. But in a situation like that, that doesn't really happen because you're constantly giving them a performance review. You're constantly giving them feedback. And those are things people complain about all the time that are working for other people, is they don't get those types of things, right? Well, if they have got a career advancement question, well, they always have now an avenue once a month where you're focusing on this, where you're asking them, right? And if you don't take the time now, right, it'll come back to bite you later on. And that's your job as a leader and as a manager or a business owner to be able to do those things with your people. And if you don't, it's going to hurt your P&L and your bottom line, because a lot of you can be super competitive, I found, with 3, 4, 5, 10 people and win deals over people that are 50 or 100 or 200 consistently. If you've got people that are super hungry and aggressive and driven and motivated, right? So people can rise up to do some pretty great things.
That's awesome. Yeah. And those are tougher things. The soft skills, I think, like you've said, they're tougher. Soft skills are the harder skills to learn.
They definitely are.
Yeah. And that's amazing what you have found, and what people need to be focusing on, especially as it relates to the people that work for them. Before we run out of time, I do want to talk slightly about what your real estate investing business looks like. I know you've got some unique things going on. Can you
Yep.
shed a little light on that and maybe pull back the curtain on some of the
Sure.
more peculiar aspects of that?
Yeah, sure. So I have some background. I've got clients in corporate real estate and things. I've worked at a large company called Acor, and I have other people at other large commercial side of it. But I had a client a few years ago that was in the flip and fix business, and we just got along really well. And he had a falling out with his business partner, and I said, "Hey, let's go and let's start this and rock this and create something new." And he was in a challenging place. And so we decided to really, give it a go and started working on the business. And, one of the things that we worked on is really not only just going and looking at a piece of property, but understanding the macro trends that are going on the economy, inflation, deflation, and finding people who knew, because that really could influence your ability. When you knew that a market was going to break, you would know beforehand.
Right.
And it's really helped us to be able to either not buy, right, something or sell or whatever we need to do. And also the other part that it brought up was really learning how to hedge, right? And like part of hedging in a real estate is a way for you to play the options market and to buy certain things. So when you cover the downside protection, right, you could cover a few $1,000s, would cover quite a bit of investment would actually fall. So what happens is you don't have swings on the downside, right? So it'd be really hard for us to lose 10 or 15% in a deal. I mean, it would be, because what would happen is if the market crashed like during COVID, right? So we have some properties. Well, we lost, and the properties were, near break even, but the amount of money we made off the options was insane. So we shared that with the investors. So then they did even better than if the real estate would have paid off, frankly, right? It's the opposite, actually, when you think about it, that occurs. So that part of it comes in. So we've also realized that we were looking at some change of use because he's in San Diego. And what happened is a lot of the change of use, the properties plummeted. And so we got a couple of those, and we found some people that are really great at permitting too. So that was one of the other things, because we postulated in California they have ADUs. When you think about them, they're essentially like that unit on the back, like a granny, apartment above the garage or something in there. Well, you can break up units there and actually create like where you'd have like two condos or something, you could break it into four. And there's ways of doing it there with zoning that is really great to do, but you have to know what to do. So we found someone to help us who knew the city. And so there are things that we had started to do that were more outside of the box to get ahead of things. And all this stuff has really sort of helped us looking at the macro view in our real estate. And we're kind of looking at small apartments and raising money and doing other stuff and fixing, just all these other things that we're just kind of countering to like build and grow, and people too, and finding them. And so it's a huge process to go through this. And I think, and we're on the path, been derailed a little bit, but the goal is to start a real estate fund. And it's probably looking more like 23 is just probably the better plan for us to do it than it is on 22, based on kind of where we're at and the benefits of doing it then and waiting a little longer.
That's intriguing. I love that. I used to be in the commodities business, which, there's lots and lots of, especially in the grain markets, you're always protecting downside risk, either for producers or for the end buyers.
Totally.
Going the other way. And I don't know, not until this conversation have I ever thought about using the options market to protect downside on.
You can do it pretty cheaply too. Like you don't have to put that. Okay. You don't have to put that much in it at all. And it's like, there's some other people out there that did. The guy, the Black Swan, and now I'm blanking on his name. His fund, like if you Google it, back in 2000, made like 4,000% or something during that time because of. He invested in this, and it's just like that's what his thesis was, right? Was betting against it, and he knew at some point the market would completely collapse, and it did. Well, now, I mean, you make a ridiculous amount off of it. So,
yeah, that's intriguing. Yeah, that's the money to look into further, because there is a way to do it, because those are so levered that you could build it in basically as an insurance premium.
Yeah, totally. And it's so small out of the total that you're doing. Even if we're actually using our money, not investors. So we don't even have to we're doing it separately outside of it. So we don't have to commingle it or anything else. And it's easier for us to not have to have a conversation with them. So we're just not, and it's so little that it really doesn't matter. And it keeps us peace of mind because we don't have to worry if the whole thing falls, because we have enough coverage. So it would be hard. Again, it'd be hard for us to lose money in a deal. We'd have to get caught where we're losing like a percentage or two would probably be the spot. But if it's more than that, then the downside would come back. and it really would help us. So I never even thought about it. My business partner started thinking about looking into it, and he was dabbling in it, and now we found things. And the other thing about it too, if someone's thinking about doing it, you just got to look to see the correlations between it. But there's so many things that you could do that it's not like one thing that you look at. You have to look at the things you're comfortable with and that you see correlates with what's going on. And then you just pick that and then you're good. So it's not it's complicated, but someone can learn how to do it. Yeah. And it's not that hard. And the bets are pretty small. Like you can bet $1,000 to like 2,000. Like it's so small on a lot of like residential properties, right? And if you're going up, it still wouldn't be that much because this thing like begins to go up and up if it starts to, go the opposite direction really fast.
Right. Yeah, you're a win-win necessarily, but you are at least protecting your downside risk on those investments. So that's really, really brilliant. That's a beautiful tip today. Jason, I've enjoyed this. Been tons of fun. We've covered loads of great stuff today, talking about blind spots, trust, growth and development, asking deeper questions. We've talked about, of course, trading options to hedge your investment portfolio risk, vulnerability. Man, I mean, it's been a great conversation. Certainly enjoyed having you on. There's final 4 questions I have for you, and I apologize because they aren't deep questions, but they're simple questions. If I gave you $20,000 to invest in real estate and you had no previous real estate investing experience, what would you do with it and why?
I would give it to my business partner and find a good property in San Diego. Leverage smart people.
I love it. Question number 2, if you could help our listeners avoid one mistake in real estate, what would it be and how would you avoid it?
I would say listen to smart people, try to figure out the macro and micro trends. And I would say, again, something is hedge your downside. Always know where your risk is and try to mitigate it, because that's ends up what kills people more in this business we're in right now. Is they get wiped out because they get greedy and they keep wanting to follow. They think the money is going to keep going like a hockey stick up, and it doesn't.
And it does not. Right. Yeah. Understood. Question number 3, when it comes to investing in the world, what's one thing you're doing right now to make the world a better place?
Well, I always try to give my time and help people. And these days, I have a lot of people call to try to get help. They can't afford anything. So I try to spend, a couple of clients a month that I have that I'll help them on something, without charging them.
Right. Yeah. Understood. That'd be a difficult place to be in. I can only imagine. Jason, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, learn more about you, buy your board games or buy your card games or find anything else out about coaching, what's the best place to do that?
They can go to JasonTreu.com. That's it. It's JasonTreu.com, and that's it. Or even Cards Against Mundanity is the card game. So if they Google that, they'll find me too. So it's pretty easy.
That's awesome. Jason, thank you again for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for listening to the How to Scale Commercial Real Estate podcast. If you can do me a favor and subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever platform it is you use to listen, if you can do that for us, that would be a fantastic help to the show. It helps us both attract new listeners as well as rank higher on those directories. So appreciate you listening. Thanks so much and hope to catch you on the next episode.